Hi, Cynthia. Are you able to hear me?
Whoever was just speaking, we can hear you.
As you guys can all hear, this meeting's being recorded. Dave Mendiola,
Here.
Laura Fitzsimmons,
Here.
Joni Eastley,
Yep.
Chris June Kiliani,
Here.
Jeff Wells,
Also here.
Angela Cook, Kate Thomas, Lorena Dellinger, Allison Jaffe, Harriet Cummings,
Here.
Jared Hickman.
Here.
It appears we have a quorum.
I can see Lorena Dellinger here. Did she say present?
Oh, she didn't. She's
Okay,
here.
I'm here.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, great. So it looks like we've got our quorum. So I'll call the meeting to order. This is the Nevada State Board on Indigent Defense Services. And here on November 2, 2023, it's a little after 1 o'clock. So we'll get started. And first off is, of course, public comment. Is there any public comment? And this is mostly virtual. So I don't see anybody in the chambers there at the State of Nevada building, so I'm assuming there's no public comment there. Anybody have any public comment? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on. Item 3, wanted introduction of new board members, and so we've got Angela Cook and Susan Bush. And first of all, I'll talk a little bit about Angela Cook. So she's the children's attorney for Southern Nevada Legal Aid, and we're thrilled to have Angela join us. So welcome, Angela. See you there. Angela, I'm just going to come to you, and if you have any comments or want to say anything on your own behalf.
Thank you for having me. That's about it. Thank you.
Great. We're thrilled to have you. Thanks, Angela. Appreciate you. And then also Susan Bush. Of course, she has replaced Drew Christensen, who's no longer with the board now and is retired. And happy for Drew. And so, excuse me. So she's the director of Office of Appointed Counsel in Clark County. And so glad to have Susan. And I see Susan there. Susan, same thing for you. If you'd like to say hello or have any comments, love to hear from you.
Thanks. I just want to say hi, and I'm looking forward to working with everybody on the board.
Great. Thank you very much, Susan. We appreciate your participation. So there we got there. Next, I'll move on to approval of the minutes. This is the August 3rd, 2023 minutes. I will not be participating in this vote to approval, as I was not present for that. But are there any comments on the minutes, any corrections or additions?
Mr. Chair, I thought they looked good, and I'll make a motion to approve.
Thank you. Got a motion to approve. Do I have a second?
This is Chris. I'll second.
Thank you, Chris. So we've got a motion and a second. All those in favor of approving the minutes for August 3, 2023, signal by aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? Seeing none.
Dave, I'll be abstaining like you were because I was not there.
Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate that.
Mr. Chair, that doesn't cause us to lose our quorum on the vote, does it?
I don't think it does.
No.
Oh, there's Sophia saying no. Yeah. Thanks, Sophia.
Thank you.
All right, so that passes. Thank you, everybody. We're going to change up our order of items here. We're going to move number 6 to our next, and then we'll come back to the public hearing. So number 6 is the National Center for State Courts, Rural Nevada Indigent Defense Services weighted caseload study. And of course, we've been waiting for this for a long time, and we're just, first of all, I'd like to thank Suzanne. I see you're on there, and thank you and your organization for going through a really rough time trying to get all this information together, and especially thanks for hanging in there and not, of course, charging us any more money to do this. So we really appreciate you guys going above and beyond. So thank you very much, and I'm going to turn it over to you, to Suzanne, to do a little presentation. You're muted, Suzanne.
You're muted. And just so the board is aware, in the notebooks that we sent out, a brief synopsis of the report is under tab 10. And the longer report that Suzanne will be speaking about is in the full version is tab 11.
Mr. Chair, may I address Marcy?
Yes, ma'am.
Marcy, it's Joni. I just want to go on the record saying how much I appreciated getting this package in the mail. The county has been very gracious. Nye County has been very gracious about printing materials for me. But this saves me a trip to the courthouse and them a lot of work. So I know this was a lot of work for your staff, and it does not go unnoticed. Thank you.
Thank you, Joni. I think we can thank Cindy for all of her hard work in putting these together.
Oh, yes. Yes, absolutely.
So we're planning to do this for every meeting going forward.
Yeah, thanks.
That is tremendously helpful.
Great comments. And yeah, thanks, Cindy and the whole staff. Appreciate you very much. This is, somebody looked at it, and I told them this is just one phone call. And they told me that I was out of my mind to be involved with that. So I think they're right, but Suzanne, you're up.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you all. This has been actually a great project to have been working on for 3 years. I don't know that we've ever had a workload project take this long, but of course the pandemic threw a monkey wrench into all of our plans. So let me just jump into what we did. So beginning in about 3 years ago, I think our first meeting was in October of 2020 to start this project. We had planned to do a time study with some supplemental qualitative data collection, which we did. We went back and forth about whether we should do this during the pandemic. It took place in April of 2020. We went ahead and did it, and just felt like the numbers that we got in terms of how long it was taking to process cases was lower than what was really happening or should have happened, although we had great participation. The case processing, the processes just weren't the same. So we went ahead and extended the contract a couple of times and added some additional data. So the original process was to do a time study where we had people track for 4 weeks what they're working on and how long it's taking them to do each of the processes. As I said, that didn't yield realistic data for us. We also did an attorney census. So we asked people about what's their average travel look like, how many hours on average do they work, and a number of things like that. That information was used ultimately to help cultivate these case weights or workload standards that we finally did. We also looked at the legal server data for the first 9 months that data collection had been in place. We didn't feel like we were getting good enough data, that not all of the people were entering time into the legal server system. And looking at Eve's report, it looks like that's still not happening consistently across all of the counties that should be using it. And then we ultimately went and looked at other time studies that have been used or developed for indigent defense providers in other states, and kind of averaged out those case weights that were consistent with the case types that we had in Nevada. We also held Delphi groups and focus groups. The Delphi groups, we met with specific attorneys over and looked at specific case types and literally walked through how long the attorneys felt like it should take and how long it does take to process those cases. And we also did focus groups where we just got information about how people process their cases, what kind of obstacles they face, and that sort of thing. All of that information ultimately was taken together to develop the case weights that we finally ended up with. I do want to make just note that I think that RAND study, that National Indigent Defense Provider RAND study, workload study that they did, has gotten a lot of attention lately. It just came out in August of this year. Most people I'm talking to, while they think those case weights would be awesome, don't see them as being realistic, instead being too high to be realistic, particularly for public defense systems, and trying to fund those kinds of fund attorneys at those levels. I want to also talk a little bit about the year value. When we build our models, once we have case weights, which are the average case processing times, we then apply those to the number of new cases coming in. And to get estimates of what that workload would be, then we multiply that case weight by each of those types of cases. You also have to have a reasonable year value, or the number of days that attorneys will work. So we worked with the committee that we initially met with and continued to work with the departmental staff, and landed on a year value of 220 days at 8 hours a day. I know there's been some comment about that and some concern about that. That does not preclude people from working overtime if they want to, but when you model out a need, you have to have a certain number of days available for everybody. And it needs to be reasonable and take into account a reasonable work-life balance. So we got there by removing weekends, of course, holidays, which there are 11 in Nevada, and then provided 25 days for leave and 4 days for continuing legal education. Just by way of comparison, when we do judicial workload studies, the average across the country is 212 days. And in fact, when we did 2 separate judicial workload studies in Nevada, one in 2005 in Clark County, that year value was 219 days, so higher, or right around the same that we've got, or a little bit lower. And in Washoe County in 2007, when we did a time study there, that year value was 210 days. So lower than what we set for the defense providers. We also allowed 1 hour a day for non-case related work, such as entering time into the legal server system and other kind of administrative duties that go with any job. And we applied an average of 40 minutes of travel per day for each attorney. And that came from that census survey. So that's how that model works. So when we applied the case weights to the model, using that year value, we come up with a need for about 90 attorneys total. And then we also generated some staffing ratios for support staff or administrative support staff at a 2-to-1 ratio in a multi-attorney office, 1-to-1 ratio in a single attorney office. Applying those ratios to that 90 attorneys shows that there's a need for a little over 46 administrative support staff, and then investigators at a 4-to-1 ratio. So there'd be a need for about 22 investigators. We are also recommending, and now we didn't recommend any standards because I couldn't find any in the literature, which are what those other standards are based on. So we are recommending that social workers be incorporated into the complement of staff in each of the counties. They do a lot of work that support what the attorneys do. And instead of having attorneys do that work, it makes more sense to have people trained specifically to do that work and let the attorneys do the attorney work that they need to do. I did see that Eve Hanan reviewed the report and made some comments that I wanted to respond to. She did note, as I did, that there are gaps in the reporting in the legal server and is recommending that that be continued to be used, which I agree with, and we did include in our recommendation number 7. Also improving the timekeeping. She's also recommending that you limit the caseloads of the attorney staff in these rural counties, which we are also recommending as well. She's also recommending that you do apply, at least temporarily, the standards from our study, but to not necessarily negate the standards in the RAND study. We agree with that. And in fact, we did make a recommendation that in the future, that the department take a look at that legal server data as it gets more populated and as it gets used more consistently. And they can just verify and validate these case weights by looking at the actual average times presented. Another comment she had, is whether the case weights take into account the immense addition of time required by looking at body worn cam information, social media information, and that sort of thing. Those comments came up a lot when we did the Delphi groups as well as in the focus groups. And so they were considered and taken into account when we developed those case weights that we finally arrived at. I think that's all I'd like to talk about right now, and I'd be happy to take any questions if you have any.
Thank you, Suzanne. Appreciate that. Are there any questions for Suzanne?
This is Chris. I just wanted to recapture. So you're saying it's 220 days, figured at 8 hours a day, 1 hour of that is administrative work.
Correct. And 40 minutes.
25 days are considered work. Okay, and 40 minutes for travel. That's what I didn't get. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions for Suzanne? This is your opportunity.
Oh, I did want to add one more thing. Looking at the RAND case weights, I did just run that through. The other issue with those RAND case weights is they don't have all the same case types that are included in the department's legal server database. But using what I could and applying those RAND case weights rather than 90 new attorney or 90 total attorneys, it says that you would need 500 attorneys.
Yeah, thank you, Suzanne. So I don't really have a question for you, Suzanne. I have a bit of a comment coming from the rural counties perspective. And that is even, your report is daunting to us. But I would ask.
Yeah, that's a good word. That's a good word, Dave. Yeah.
Yeah. But I guess I had a pretty long discussion with Marcy and Peter the other day about this. And I guess what I would ask Marcy, just briefly, if you don't mind, sort of recap what we talked about relative to, we still have the maximum contribution in place. So even if we did, we as, for example, Humboldt County needed to bring on 3 new attorneys and another legal, et cetera, and investigators, that is under the maximum contribution. The good news, I think what my commissioners would say is that that's really great, Dave, and we appreciate that. However, our experience with the state is that, it's historically, it suddenly becomes an unfunded mandates, and one day they walk away from the funding, the legislature does, and then we're sitting out here with, having to pick up those costs. So that's going to be a problem for any commission to understand. But I guess that's why I'm going to ask Marcy to make a comment. With the work that Marcy and Tom and Peter have done with the legislature, and some of others of you have been involved in that, I really believe that they're on board now. I think the work, especially over the last year in the legislature, has been outstanding. And I really think they have found they're in a place now where it would be hard to reverse. But Marcy, could you make a few comments about that, please?
Sure. I think when Tom, Peter, and I go around, we take the opportunities to try and go to all of our rural counties. And it's very important for us to go in person and sit across the table from the leaders of the community And we have not kept it a secret that this workload will be coming out. We've been with Suzanne for 3 years. A lot of her staff has retired during that time waiting for these. And we really appreciate Suzanne working with us and ultimately getting these workloads. But we've been sitting across the table with the rural counties, sharing these initial numbers. So I believe that they had expected that there's going to be some big need in certain areas. Now, some areas are just fine. And some of our rural counties, the indigent defense systems that they have set up are sufficient to cover the workload that this study sets forth. But some that we may struggle with are counties like Elko, which will need 16.4, Lyon County, which will need 12, Nye County, which will need 12, and possibly even Carson City. And one of our biggest issues is that Elko currently has an office staffed for 9, but they're only able to hire 5. And you'll hear later on that our board and our department are looking for solutions of how to get attorneys into the rurals. You'll hear from Tom in the report about possibly providing student loan forgiveness or some other incentive to get people to move to the rurals. So at our next board meeting, we'll be wanting to talk about ideas of what we can provide. We're also working with the bar as well as the Supreme Court to try to change rules in some of these rural areas so that we can get more staff to that. But every time that we've gone out to those rural counties, we make sure that they understand the maximum contribution formula. And we have taken those steps to do everything we can do to protect these rural counties. This board submitted a bill draft request where we changed the law that said if the appropriation that our department receives for the maximum contribution is insufficient, that we can go to the statutory contingency account and they must give us that money. So we are going to the counties and we're telling them that even if the budgeted amount is insufficient, we have that ability to go to the Board of Examiners and ask for, or the IFC and ask for additional funding. And that's something that we've gone out and told them that if there are proposals, those are things that we'll track and we'll notify the rural counties if there is any sort of desire to change this. But as far as I've heard, I believe that the state has upheld their end of this promise to pay for these additional costs. The requests that we've made for these bill drafts have become law. And we were given a really great opportunity with Assembly Bill 518, where they knew that this maximum contribution formula was going to cost the counties more money, and over $6 million for each year of the biennium was set aside for this extra cost. So the funds are there to be able to reimburse the counties if there are extra expenses for bringing on these attorneys. And that's what our focus is going to be next, is continuing to educate the rural counties about the funding and the fact that we are protective here of helping them, making sure they get reimbursed.
Great. Thank you, Marcy. Appreciate it. Yeah, so I really feel like the work that's been done to date through the legislative process has really set us in a good position. And while I still feel like it's daunting, I do think that we've got some good news to report to our county commissions. And again, they're backing us, the state's backing us in this effort. So is there anybody else who has any thoughts, comments, questions?
This is Chris. If I could just follow up with Marcy, if I may, Mr. Chair.
Yes, ma'am.
In Assembly Bill 518, where it allows you, if it's underfunded, allows you to go back to the contingency, does it say they shall grant it, or does it say they may?
Marcy, you're unmuted.
It is an Assembly Bill 518 where we made that change. It is
Okay.
a different one, and I'm going to pull it up. If I can.
Okay.
I think it's 454.
And maybe not. That was the other number I had.
So Tom, do you have 454 up?
And if not, because we'll talk about the funding part, then we just may want to clarify that. And if not, then we might want to look at a housekeeping change that doesn't allow it to be considered but not approved?
Okay, Chris, so I have it. It's Assembly Bill 454, Section 1. And in subsection 2,
Okay.
it says amounts that are not an obligation of the county pursuant to subsection 1 must be paid from money appropriated to the department. After the appropriation for such compensation and expenses is exhausted, money must be allocated from the reserve for statutory contingency for the payment of such expenses.
Okay, so that's good language. I think the main thing is you just have to make sure what adequate money is put into the account in the first place, because that would become your secondary hidden barrier. Thank you.
And I think the other positive, I don't know if you're at that meeting, but with the support of the governor's office, we now have $3.5 million in our budget for each year of the biennium. So a total of $7 million for reimbursement. So we took what the counties thought that they were going to be spending under their current plans and prepared our budget request for that, knowing that this maximum or this weighted caseload study was coming out. We knew that those expenses would increase. And Assembly Bill 518 was proposed by the through the legislature, and it does set aside that over $6 million per year specifically for the purpose of reimbursing counties for these extra expenses, among other things.
Thank you.
Very good. Yes, thanks, Marcy. Appreciate that. If there's no other questions, we'll give you one more chance here, and then we'll move on to item B of 6. Any other questions? Okay, we're going to move on. So item B is to adopt guidelines setting forth the maximum workloads for attorneys providing indigent defense services. And so as you heard, Suzanne mentioned that they do recommend, or excuse me, Eve Hannon's report did recommend that we adopt these workloads. And I think the key here is to establish a baseline. So we need to start somewhere. Let's start here. And the idea being that over time, obviously, we'll be monitoring this and to see if this, in fact, is accurate and we're tracking properly with better reporting, then we could make potential changes down the road. But so from there, I would just, if nobody has any other questions, ask for a motion to approve or to adopt the guidelines set forth by the NCSC study.
Dave, can I ask a quick question before we vote on that?
Absolutely.
I'm just curious what we want to establish as a board for a timeline. And I say it that way because, well, I like their study and I think they did a great job. I don't think we have 90 additional attorneys available to run off into rural Nevada right this minute. And I don't want to create a vote here that adopts these without some level of phase in to allow folks in the counties the opportunity to actually make this work.
And Dave, may I just address that?
Yes.
So one thing that we have to remember is the Delphi or the stipulated consent judgment that this board must follow requires that we have a deadline of compliance with the Delphi study workload within a 12-month period of time. So what our board or our department has, thought about doing and what the regulations say that we are proposing is that the plans for the provision of indigent defense services have to detail to the board how they plan to comply with this. And those plans are due in May. So the department is going to spend the next couple of months going around, talking to the rural counties and working on modifying their plans of compliance with this. Because the stipulated consent judgment says we have a year, that's what we're going to work toward. We might have to update, counsel for the parties or Professor and Monitor Hanan if we don't feel that that's able to be completed, but we are going to reach out to the rural counties and implement the plans as best they can be. Specifically, what we're looking at is figure 6 on page 19 of the study sets forth the final attorney case weights and hours. Figure 7 sets forth the annual caseload standards, and figure 8 sets forth the staffing ratio, and figure 7 and 8 are both on page 20. Now that attorney year value, it's what's recommended, but all of our counties are independent, and some have independent contractors, some had salaried employees, and there's different benefits for working in different counties. And that's why we're going to have to go county by county to talk to each about how they can propose filling the number of hours that are needed for their caseloads and creating creative plans the best that we can. So I don't know if we have any other option other than requiring that we try completion within 12 months, because that's in that stipulated consent judgment.
Hey, Chair, I also wanted to address a accidental misstatement there. Jeff, it's not that we need 90 extra attorneys to go out into the rurals. That's a total number. So it's approximately 30 additional attorneys that are needed under this study. While that's still a daunting number, and there's not, 30 indigent defense lawyers probably hanging out there waiting to take these spots, that's the number of extra additional attorneys that are needed, not 90.
It doesn't matter if it is 30 or 90 when you are in a frontier county where it's difficult or almost impossible for you to get one extra attorney. 30 is just as intimidating and daunting as 90.
This is Chris. When again will we discuss as a board some solutions for attracting and retaining? Is that because there could be monetary ties to that, and I would assume it would have to be a legislative appropriation?
Yes, we can schedule that at the next meeting. That Assembly Bill 518 sets aside funding for us to comply with Davis. So we can request part of that $6 million for that compliance. Internally, we also plan at the next board meeting to, set an agenda item of what we can offer new graduates to come to the rural counties. We did have the opportunity to go to the law school and sat down and had a talk with them about recruitment ideas, and also Angela Cook is going to hopefully help with this one too.
And this is Chris, and I like the idea of a student loan forgiveness. We should have done this years ago for teachers, but one thing I did do when I was in legislature, because you want to also retain those that are there, is if you work within, I forget how we identified a school, but say it's a special needs, high needs school or so forth, you earned an extra credit on your PERS retirement. And so that becomes an incentive for those that are qualified to earn. So that just might be another potential discussion item.
Mr. Chair, it's Joni and Tonopah. I have one other, it's a question. Should any motion we make include the correction that was made to the report that Cindy notified us of this morning?
I would suggest that we do that. Yes.
Thank you.
Good question.
Dave, one more comment from me. I apologize for saying 90 instead of 30. I mean, that is what the report says. I just missed that. But, and Marcy, I understood your explanation. I don't think we should hold up on this. I was more concerned about the next step. When we go to the rural counties, we ask them to modify their plans, and they do so, but then we get to the next step after that, where they're not just able to get people to come, even with all the bells and whistles we offer. I don't want us to come back down hard on anybody and try to say they didn't meet the plan, they didn't meet this. I'm not objecting at all about adopting what have in front of us so you meet the guideline. I just want to recognize we are going to have that problem. We're not going to fill all 30 in a year, despite what the consent decree says, et cetera.
Yeah, that's a good comment, Jeff. I would agree with that. So thinking ahead.
Okay, so I'll try a motion, Mr. Chair, if you'd like. I'd move that the board adopt the weighted caseload study with the correction noted by staff this morning.
I'll second her motion.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Joni. Got a first and a second. Any questions about the motion? If none, all those in favor of the motion signal by aye.
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 Any opposition?
Aye.
Very good.
Was that opposition?
I don't think it was opposition. I think she was just jumping in late.
Oh, it was a late vote. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you very much. The motion passes. Appreciate it very much. That was a great conversation, and I do think that it's going to be very interesting to have that discussion about other incentives, because we're dealing with that on the county levels, as I think the state is as well, on every front, you know, at every position, every skill set. And it's a huge challenge ahead of us. So I look forward to that. All right, so we're going to move on to our public hearing. Item 5, and so the public hearing is of proposed regulations of the Board of Indigent Defense Services, Chapter 180 of the Nevada Administrative Code, LCB file number R033-23 for discussion and possible action. And I will turn it over to Marcy.
Thank you. So at the last board meeting, we held a workshop. And after the workshop, we sent our regulations that we put together as a group to the Legislative Council Bureau. And we received what's attachment 2 in your notebooks. As you can recall, at the last board meeting, we talked about how many of these regulations that we are proposing are specifically required by law with the passage of some new bills that we have to put into place, and that's the hourly rate that we're setting for appointed counsel. We're also requiring compliance with the county plan or that caseload, and that's something that we have to do because of the stipulated consent judgment. And we are amending some other language to make it more clear and concise, and then repealing the regulatory maximum contribution formula because it's been placed in statute. And I know that we discussed these at the last board meeting, so I don't know if you'd like to go to public comment, or if you'd like any sort of time for questions, or if you want me to go more in depth.
No, are there any questions before we go a little further here? Is there any specific questions somebody has relative to receiving your packet and reading through the materials?
No, Mr. Chair, thank you.
This is Chris. I guess, do we formally have to open the public hearing?
That's a good point. I can certainly do that. I thought I did that, but I can do that. Yes. So I'm going to formally open a public hearing. Time is 1:38 p.m. On the proposed regulations of the Board on Indigent Defense Services, Chapter 180 of the Nevada Administrative Code, LCB file number R033-23. So is there any questions from the board before I turn it out to the public? Okay, hearing none. Any public comment relative to these proposed regulations from the board?
And Chair, while you're waiting for public comment, I did want to let this board know that a copy of this notice and regulation was sent to the State Library Archives and Public Records. It was also updated to the Nevada website, as well as our Department of Indigent Defense Services website, and it was available at our department for anyone to be able to inspect these new regulations.
Thank you, Marcy. Appreciate it. So I'll call out another time, public comment on the proposed regulations. Okay, hearing it none, I'll bring it back to the board. Marcy, do you want to continue on?
Regulations, if that's what you'd like to do.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that, Marcy. Sorry.
Oh, I would just ask the board to vote on adopting the proposed regulations.
Great, thank you. So Do I have a motion to adopt the proposed regulations?
Yes, this is Laura Fitzsimmons. I move that we adopt the proposed regulations.
And I'll second.
Thank you, Laura. And then who was the second from?
It's Jared. Thank you.
Oh, hey, Jared. The voice sounded familiar. Thank you very- So I have a first and a second motion. So is there any questions about the motion?
This is
Very
Chris,
good.
just a quick one on section 2, if I might. Section 2, subsection 4. This is where you work with them, Marcy, to revise their plan if they don't have enough, or they don't have the properly staff person in place for that.
Yes, so this, Marcy, read for the record. A lot of these regulations that we're trying to clarify are issues that the department has run into. And with the nationwide crisis and shortage of indigent defense providers, some of the rural counties are reliant on newer attorneys that aren't able to take on the whole array of legal problem code cases. Specifically, we're running into an issue with attorneys qualified to handle category A and B felonies. So what we're asking here is if they choose to contract with an individual that is not experienced to handle that level of cases, that they let us know in their plan for the provision of indigent defense services how we find appropriate co-counsel to sit with them. At this point, we track that, and we've worked with the counties to say, we know this person isn't qualified. So every time we see a higher level case, we reach out to get a co-counsel, but would like the plans to set that forth so that we clearly know what the process is, and there's a clear understanding. So that's the purpose of that.
Okay, and then secondly, Suzanne recommended that we look at social workers, which I agree. Does any of this have, sorry, excuse me, have to reflect that decision, or is that at a later point?
I don't believe Suzanne made a staffing recommendation in her I mean, she does recommend that social workers
4 to 1. Yeah, she didn't give us a number on that, right?
There's my understanding, I don't know if Suzanne is still here, but there's no studies on how many social workers are needed by attorneys. So she wasn't able to give us a staffing ratio that should be used in the study, but she does recommend that offices do hire social workers.
Okay, and then juvenile justice as well is probably another area that we might not have the qualified individuals, so the plan would have to be modified to let you know that if they were dealing with a adolescent.
Yes, we are modifying in section 8 of our recommendations. We did add a requirement that they must be skilled in juvenile defense and modified what requirements we're asking of them if they're doing juvenile representation.
Yeah, I see that on the adolescent background. Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Chris. All right.
Dave, can I ask one more question of Marcy?
Yes, sir.
I'm just wondering if we've had it reviewed to make sure we're not doing an improper delegation of a spending item, because we're saying, I think it's going to be set at the same hourly rate as the Criminal Justice Act panel, but we don't set that. And the statute assigned us the duty of doing it. So I just wondered if our DAG ruled on that, and I'm okay if they did. I'm just curious if we ever had that question asked.
And Jeff, I did not ask that question. Sophia, do you have an opinion on that?
I am so sorry. I had to take another phone call real quick. You asked the question again.
So, Sophia, the question was the legislature empowered this board, and one of the things to do is to set the minimum compensation. The regulation that we are seeking to adopt actually punts that responsibility to the Criminal Justice Act panel and whatever they set the amount is. And so my question is that an improper delegation or not? Because the legislature really told us to do it.
So I think there are two things that can happen. And right now, since your board is fairly new and since you're doing these studies, I think for now, it's okay to punt, but at some point you are going to have to put this in regulation because that's what your board is supposed to do. But I think right now in regulation, it says basically the board will adopt whatever, and sorry, I don't have the language in front of me, but the board right now will adopt, is it the
Sophia, I think what he's talking about is the hourly rate for appointed counsel, which at this time is statutorily $100. And what we're proposing to change it to is the prevailing rate paid by the CJA panel at the time the work was completed. And just a little background as to why we chose that rate is because it's published. And we're all aware of what that rate is. It does have cost of living increases, which happen every year. And it also will make the state of Nevada in the rurals competitive with the federal work that's being completed. So that's why we chose that CJA panel rate. But that's what he's asking about, Sophia.
And note, Sophia, I'm not complaining about the rate. I just want to make sure that we are allowed to do that because technically this board's supposed to actually put the rate in, not deferred it to somebody else to do it. That's all.
Well, as long as it seems like you've had a discussion about the rate, what the rate should be, and if you agree with that rate, I think that that's basically, that basically satisfies this board's duties.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Dave.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. Good question. Thanks, Sophia. All right. So now I'm really lost. I don't remember where we are. So it's all your fault, Jeff.
I don't think we voted, did we?
I don't think we did either, but
No, we haven't voted.
We did not vote yet.
I've got a motion and a second, and if there are not any other questions, all those in favor, please signal by aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
Good. Any opposition? Very good. Motion passes. Thank you. So we will move on to number 7, budget and legislative update. And we'll start with A, that's the FY23 final reimbursement of indigent defense expenses to the counties in the amount of $3,265,972.92. Marcy, I'll throw it your way.
Thank you. And Chair, before we move on, I do see Kate Thomas is present for the meeting. So I just wanted the minutes to reflect that. She's present now.
Hey, Marcy, I've been here since about 8 minutes after 1. Sorry, I was a little late.
Awesome. Thanks, Kate. Going to the good news, fiscal year 23, our final reimbursements for indigent defense for our rural counties was over $3.2 million. So that means that with the minimum standards that this board has promulgated and the actions of our rural counties, they've made those improvements to their indigent defense systems in the amount of over $3.2 million. So I think that's a very big deal that we're seeing this positive change. Moving to subsection B of fiscal year 24, quarter 1, Peter is working on reviewing the fiscal reporting. Our fiscal reporting is getting better from the rural counties. They're providing the backup that they need, which means it takes more time for us to review it. We are at this point going through all of the quarter 1 fiscal reporting. And Peter has a question. Did he need to take public comment and close the public comment? Peter, you just want to ask that?
Sure, yeah, I was just curious as to whether we needed to close the public hearing portion of before moving back to the agenda.
Yes, you do.
Yep, I definitely missed that. So let the record show before we move on here that I am closing the public hearing on the proposed regulations officially.
Okay, sorry. So fiscal year 24, quarter one fiscal update, we don't have a table for you of how much was spent because we haven't had an opportunity to go through and review it. One county has met their maximum already, and that is White Pine County. So they will be receiving a reimbursement. As we may remember, White Pine County has opted into the state public defender, and they paid the yearly rate for the public defender in advance. So that's part of the reason they've met their maximum so quickly. I also wanted to point out that the fiscal year 23 final reimbursements are in table 12, if you'd like to see how much each county has spent. Lander County is still owed a little over $3,000, and we're working on getting that paid with the governor's finance office, but we expect that to be completed quickly. And then moving on to section C, if that's okay.
Yes, ma'am.
And this is going to be looking at attachments 7 and 8 in your booklets. So as we've talked about a little bit, Assembly Bill 518 appropriated funding from IFC for allocation to subsection A, reimburse the counties for costs in excess of the maximum contribution, including costs of compliance with our workload standards. B, the cost of the department related to compliance with Davis v. State consent judgment. C, the cost of the Office of the State Public Defender for contracting for legal services for complex cases. And D, the cost for training and pay parity for attorneys who provide indigent defense. So we have submitted 2 work programs. We are waiting to see if they are scheduled for the December IFC. In the first work program, that's in number 7, we're requesting funding for an oversight department. We're requesting approximately $626,335. And what we are requesting is an administrative assistant to help with the calendaring and the travel requests for these 2 contract attorneys or independent contractors that would like to be able to hire. We are requesting funding or an allocation for funding to hire 2 experienced hourly contract attorneys to provide oversight and go into our rural counties. Our concern, initially our request had salaried staff, but we were concerned at the state pay rate that we would not get applicants. And if we did get applicants, that they may not have that experience that we'd like to see in our attorneys that are going out to the rural counties and providing this oversight. So we're hoping that if given this appropriation, we'll have that experienced staff to help us to comply with the oversight requirement in Davis that we've continuously struggled with. The second request that we've set forth is a training budget of approximately $89,340. The Davis Monitor has repeatedly been concerned that we are required to provide high quality training, and that with our current budget, she doesn't believe that we have sufficient funding to be able to do so. What we are asking for is $34,370. And with that, we'd like to send 5 rural attorneys to a national trial college, defense college per year, where we pay their way to go. We're asking for another appropriation of $20,000. And this is to help reimburse the travel costs for attorneys to come to our training. You know that we do have a Burn JAG sub grant, but they put a lot of limitations on where we can have the training and who we can offer the travel reimbursement to. So we're requesting $20,000 so that we can, have more freedoms of what we feel would be most beneficial for our attorneys in their training. We're asking for an additional $10,500 to reimburse nationally accepted trainers to come to our annual conference and train our public defenders. And then we're asking for $21,500 to engage a professional conference manager to help our department, reach out to each of these indigent defense providers, notify them of the training, and to keep in constant contact for, travel reimbursement and other issues that Peter mainly is in charge of at this point. For anticipated compliance with the workload standard, the one pipeline that we are requesting is $13,000 to continue our stipends for students at Boyd School of Law to come and work in our rural counties. And we have proof of concept that this works. One of our students from our first year actually is currently working at the Carson City Public Defender's Office. So he interned 2 years ago at the Carson City Public Defender's Office. It was the Nevada State Public Defender at the time, and now he's employed there. So we believe that this stipend program is a pipeline that can be part of the solution for getting attorneys to the rural counties. And then finally, we're asking for additional funding in the amount of $36,908. Part of that is additional cost for our legal server case management system because the price did go up for that. And then the second part of it is that the monitor has repeatedly been concerned that many of our independent contractors are not reporting data accurately and consistently. Our hope is to have funding to provide Westlaw Edge or a consistent online research service to all the attorneys that are taking cases in the rurals. And if they're entering their time into legal server, we would provide them Westlaw free of charge. Now, this is a big deal because number one, prosecutors get access to these research systems. So I think public defenders should have the same access. And number two, private attorneys generally would have to pay $430 a month for the same research system. So I think it could be a really great incentive for them to take cases in the rurals and to enter their time if we give them that as payment and a thank you for the time that it takes for them to enter their time. The second work program that I have is in attachment 8. And this is requesting pay parity for our public defenders. What we're asking for at the state public defender's office, we're asking for an allocation of $130,066 from Assembly Bill 518. And what we are proposing is to pay quarterly stipends to attorneys in the Nevada State Public Defender's Office to bring them in line or in pay parity with the urban offices and what they're paying. So Peter went through and reviewed what the salaries in Clark, Washoe, and the Carson City Public Defenders are for the different job titles. We took the median range of that, and we took what the public defender's office salary is now and, asked for a stipend to bring them up to that median range. And with their current, I believe we're asking for 5 stipends, which total in a year, $260,000. But because we only have a 6-month period, we're asking for the 130. And the plan is if they're employed in March, we're going to award it in March. And if they're employed in June, we would award it in June, if we're granted that. And I can take any questions if there are any.
Okay, thank you, Marcy. Any questions for Marcy? Okay, if none, Marcy, do we need a motion on any of this? It doesn't look like it, but we did have for action, possible action, so.
I don't think so.
Okay, very good. Thank you for that report. Appreciate it very much. We'll move to item 8, oversight and Davis update. And Tom, I believe you're going to handle that.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, that's correct. I'll try to make this brief because some of it will be redundant with what Marcy's already gone over for you. But we do have the 10th report from the Davis monitor. Professor Hanan, I believe, is still with us, and so she will be able to answer any questions as well. I'm just going to go over the summary points, but you all have it, and if anyone has any specific questions, either Professor Hanan or somebody else can answer that. The main thing is the achievements. Again, Marcy's gone over most of this, or we've discussed it in other items here, but the weighted caseload study was completed, and now we have the approved standards after this meeting. We have requested, and we're waiting for hearing on AB 518 funding to further comply with the Davis judgment, including for oversight, training, recruitment, and mandatory reporting. Again, we've gone over the proposed regulation regarding the hourly rate, which the board has now approved. Reimbursements to counties, fiscal year. I think you got the full report from Marcy. I think it's actually 3.2 million for the last fiscal year. We continue to do oversight, and I want to thank Marcy and Peter for both stepping up and helping me with that, going out into the field. Again, this is a daunting piece of our mandate, and we are asking for funds for additional staff to help with that. And also, we have been working on a rural capital defense plan to comply with the ABA death penalty guidelines. And so that report is in here as well on our initial oversight on that, checking on county lists and trying to incorporate a plan for what they need to do if they have a death penalty case in any of these rural counties. County plans, again, we continue to monitor and work with the counties. Some of them, as I think I've discussed in other meetings, we've incorporated, excuse me, the municipal courts into them. And then now we're going to work on incorporating compliance with the workload study as well as this death penalty plan. Workload report. So this has to do with the quarterly reports, which I'll get into in the next section a little bit, but we changed the format on that to further comply with the Davis mandate. Marcy came up with a survey that was very helpful in getting private attorney or attorneys' private workload numbers, which have been very difficult for us to pin down in the past. So again, good job, Marcy. And pipeline ideas, we've thrown this out in a number of meetings and Marcy referenced it. Obviously, this is a piece of the puzzle in complying with the workload numbers, which is how do we get more people into Nevada? How do we get a pipeline from the university into the rural counties where the shortage of indigent defense lawyers is the worst? So we're working on all of those. Okay, yeah, the Supreme Court 49.5 is later too. So I can either take questions, or Professor Hanan can take questions, or I can move on.
Thank you, Tom. Professor Hanan, did you want to make any comments?
Not necessarily. I put a lot in the report there, but I really appreciate everything that the department is doing. Their funding requests under 518 Section 7 make a lot of sense. And I do share some of the concerns with how are we going to think about the rural counties where it's difficult to attract new lawyers. And that's probably going to require some additional strategies that I know Marcy and her team are thinking about.
Very good. Thank you. Appreciate it. Are there any questions for Tom at this point in time? I know he's got some more here, but is there any questions at this stage? Very good. Tom, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. So moving on to Section B, the fiscal year 24 Q1 quarterly data reports. You guys probably noticed that they look different than they have in the past, and that is due to us answering a number of concerns from Professor Hanan regarding full compliance with the Davis mandate. In simple terms, we needed more granular data. We needed more details from each attorney, each office, as opposed to just bulk county data. So that's what we've done. We've presented this raw data in an Excel format. Each county has its own report, but then there's tabs at the bottom for each of the offices, including for the kind of one-off conflict appointments. There's a tab for Nevada appointed counsel. Again, private workload due to Marcy's survey was included with this, and we have better numbers than we've had before. And I'm happy to answer any questions about that.
Any questions, board members?
Nope.
Very good. Thomas, continue on.
Thank you. So last thing is, I already touched on our oversight efforts. And then there is, trying to find it real quick. We advocated for this rule change for Supreme Court Rule 49.5, which was adopted by the Supreme Court. And essentially, so there's a carve out in the statutes that allows for law students to work under an organized or under the supervision of an organized public defender office. And they can actually go in, you know, and handle cases and go to court and do all of this. It's a limited practice under that circumstances, but there was, between when they graduate law school and when they pass the bar, there's no ability, say, for them to stay in that office if that office had offered them a job or whatever. There's no ability for them to continue to do what they had been doing as a student. So this rule change just extends that and allows for law graduates for a certain period of time. I think they can take the bar 2 times. Anyway, but it allows them to practice in between graduating from law school and passing the bar. So if they were interning in an office and practicing under this limited license, they could continue essentially to do that work until they pass the bar. Happy to answer any questions about that.
Any questions for Tom? Very good. Thanks, Tom. Good report. Appreciate it. So we'll now move on to item 9, and it's a training update. Peter's going to handle that.
Good afternoon, everyone. I get the pleasure this time of actually not presenting a bunch of numbers and droning on. So I'll talk a little bit about our training efforts. You should see in tab 13 in the binders you got, it's got a summary of our training for the last few months and for the upcoming trainings. We've had some great speakers, including Dr. Dunbar from UNR, who was talking about bias in the criminal justice system. Is fantastic. We've had a social worker come in, talk about how to get clients through the system if they have certain mental health issues. We're going to be talking about mental health awareness and things for attorneys in the upcoming month. And in December, we have Jacob Summer, who's going to give us a speech on civility and ethics to close out the year. We've started planning our 2024 annual conference. We actually had our first advisory committee meeting today with members from around the state. We're looking at actually taking it to a rural jurisdiction. So we're hoping we're going to find some space in beautiful sunny Elko, Nevada, sometime in May for the conference. We're going to theme it around probably mostly DUI, since those are the most charged cases throughout the state and the rural counties. And we're hoping to keep building that program as we move on. I'd be remiss if I didn't thank the Clark County Public Defender's Office, the Clark County Special Public Defender's Office, the Washoe County Public Defender's Office, and the Alternate Public Defender's Office. They've been providing some fantastic assistance with our training, some great resources to our personnel. Oh, the Federal Public Defender's Office also provides a lot of information and training opportunities for our members. So I'd really like to give them a shout out as well if I had the chance.
Very good. Thanks, Peter. Any questions for Peter relative to training?
There was a question in the chat from Franny Forson that said, can the rest of the bar be notified of our trainings? Yes, I'm more than happy to provide that to the defense bar, but we do try to limit it to defense bar practitioners only, Franny. Yes, I can provide that both to the FPD when I come out, and the I do generally provide it to the structured offices, and everybody on our list should be getting that.
Thank you, Peter.
Hopefully it answers that question.
Anybody else with a question? I just noticed that Franny's hand was up there in the chat. So if none, no other questions, we'll move on to item 10. And that's upcoming meetings. And that item A is February 1, 2024 at 1 p.m. will be our next meeting, and that will be virtual. And then we are going to talk on item B, a request to move the May 2, 2024 board meeting to June 2024. Do you want to speak to that, Marcy?
Yes, the department is requesting, we currently have our board meeting scheduled for May 2nd, but we're requesting that it could be rescheduled to a date in June. As you may recall, because we are in the budget building season in the summer, we may need the board to approve our budget request in the month of June. We might not have too much put together by May, so we're asking that it be put in June. We'll also be working on the bill draft requests in the February and possibly June meetings. And our annual report is due to the governor, the legislature, and the Supreme Court on July 1st. And this board needs to approve that annual report as well. Since our training is going to be held late May, we may not be able to write about that in our annual report if we meet in the beginning of May. So we're asking if we could discuss where we would like to meet. Historically, it's been said that we should think about Lake Tahoe, but I know that when Allison Jaffe made that offer, the Justice of the Peace, that would offer us that space has since left his employment as a Justice of the Peace. And I don't know if the new Justice of the Peace would make that same offer to us. So I'm asking if we could discuss possible dates at the beginning of June or mid-June of what works best for this board and where we would like to have an in-person location, and just guidance for this board if we would like to continue to have virtual meetings, or if you'd like to have, we meet about every quarter, if we'd like to have just one in-person meeting a year or possibly two. So we're just looking for guidance as that. And the reason that we had a location available today was because there was a change in the law and you're required to have a physical location if you are adopting regulations. So that's the reason that we had a physical location today. We won't generally do that if this board would like to meet exclusively virtually, but I just asked guidance on that issue.
Thank you, Marcy. Folks, you want to take a little time to look at your schedules and see if you've got some dates that might work. Like she said, she's got the 6th, 7th, 13th, or 14th. Maybe talk about that first, and then we can talk about the in-person question as well. For me personally, I'm good for all of those.
Same here.
Is there anybody who can't make it on any of those or one of those? Please point that out and we'll try to avoid that if possible.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is Kate Thomas from Washoe, and I would likely be able to make the June 6th, but the rest of those dates I may be traveling.
Thank you, Kate.
And I'm in the same boat. This is Jared. I'm in the same boat as Kate Thomas.
Okay, anybody else?
This is Chris. I sent in that the 6th and 7th work best, so.
Okay. So 6th is looking good. Is there anybody that can't make the 6th? Okay, looks like we have a date, Marcy. June 6th. Now, I guess the next question is on in person. Maybe just a few comments about, for me personally, virtual is always great. I've become accustomed to it, but I do like seeing y'all in person. So if we could do it at least once a year, that would be my preference. And again, June 6th is good for me.
So Dave, a couple of years ago, I think I was the one a couple of years ago who essentially asked for us to have at least one meeting a year in person where we all are together.
It was you.
I'd still like to stick to that.
I agree, Jeff. So having said that, again, June 6th, I like it for any number of reasons. Number one, we're obviously in this summer months. Road conditions should always be pretty good. with the exceptional weather issue here and there. So that would be good. I like the Lake Tahoe. Can we follow up on that? I think you said it was Harriet that had the connection there. Harriet, is that who it was, Marcy?
It was Allison Jaffe, and
Well, Allison, I'm sorry.
we can follow up and we can contact the county if there's other space available.
Okay.
So we can do that. Just the justice of the piece is no longer there. So I didn't know if it changed it.
Okay.
Lake Tahoe does work. And then we'd like to know, since it's at Lake Tahoe, would we like a 1 o'clock meeting or would you like it a little earlier?
Okay. Yeah, so I mean, I like the idea of having it earlier if we're in there, get in the night before, and then we can get our business done and let people enjoy the spring.
Marcy, from a budget point of view, is the state going to have enough money for us to spend the night before? I mean, if you're doing it in the morning, it's a great idea, but only if we can go in the night before. That's
Yes, we do have a travel budget. I believe it's $10,000.
that's enough for Dave and I. What about the rest of you?
Right.
So we do have a travel budget, and this is our base year. So we want to make sure that we're accurately spending our budget of what's needed for future budget builds.
Okay,
And I would say do it night before and come in and meet in their morning.
Okay, good. All right, so why don't we just plan on Marcy working on the June 6th with arrival on the 5th. The 5th, maybe we can have a little gathering in the night of the 5th. And then we'll have the meeting in the morning, and that way people can move on, enjoy the surroundings, or go back home, whatever they need to do on the 6th. All right, and why don't we start with Lake Tahoe and go from there. If that doesn't work out, we'll look at some other options. Okay, very good. And then just a reminder that currently August 1st, 2024, 1 p.m. board meeting is the other one that we've got set. And obviously, if there's an issue with that comes up, I don't know that we need to talk about that now, but if something happens, please let Marcy and staff know that so that we can work around it. And again, at our June 6th meeting, we can work on an alternate day or time if that's necessary. So any other questions on that?
Chair, could I just give a little update to the board?
Absolutely.
2 things. We expect Susan Bush to be appointed by the governor, hopefully before the next board meeting. So we're waiting on the finalization of her appointment. And we did have 1 resignation from our board. Cassie Hall did resign from our board yesterday. So we do expect that NACO will be selecting a new individual to be on the board. So if you know of anyone that you think would be a good fit, please contact NACO to let them know. And then finally, I just want to let the board know that Sophia Long, who has served as our Attorney General deputy, will be leaving her employment at the AG's office. So this will be our last meeting with her. So I just want to thank her for all the hard work that she's helped the department with.
Oh, Sophia, Godspeed.
Yes, thank you, Sophia.
Thank you.
Good luck.
Thank you for working with.
Sophia, I'm really sorry to hear that, but I'm happy for you. You've really been great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes.
Marcy, do you have a list of our terms, or do they exist someplace?
Yes, I can get that for you.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Any other questions that you want to wrap up before we go to public comment? Okay. Very good. So I'll go to public comment. Is there any public comment? Let's go out on online first. See if there's anything.
Nothing here.
Great. Thank you, Cindy. Hearing no public comment, I'm going to adjourn this meeting. It's 2:19 p.m. Thank you very much, everybody. We appreciate it.
Good job, Dave. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Good meeting, Marcy.
Good job. Have a happy holidays coming up.
Good not seeing you, Jeff. Take care.